Okay, hi guys. Okay, I'm gonna talk to you about Unity GUI. It's one of our new 2.0 features, and yeah, let's get to it. So, what is Unity GUI? This is what we're talking about. Quick sort of rundown. What does it do? What's the principle behind it? And then, how do you use it for doing fixed position GUI, where you're saying, I want this button exactly here. How Unity GUI can also lay out for you. Then you get some HTML-like sort of where content is pushing each other around. And finally, I'm gonna touch up on skinning, because most likely you'll think that our built-in skin sucks. That is good, you can make your own. Okay, so what is Unity GUI? Yeah, it's completely skinnable and it has auto layouting. It is an immediate mode GUI. And what this means is that it's quite different from what you're used to. Basically, you do not create a button object and have a lot of properties on it. Everything is done through code. So you just have one line of code and that creates a button. It's a bit weird to get used to, but once you're there, it's incredibly flexible and it's really, really great for games where anything can happen at any time. It's got a lot of features. It's got draggable windows. You got your buttons, your toggles, sliders, scroll views, text fields. I mean, yeah, the goal is to have a complete GUI system, and we're pretty much there. So, fixed positioning. We've got lots of rects coming up, guys. Now, I'm just gonna start up with a small example so you can also see how we're supposed to be thinking here. So, good. You have a function. It's called onGUI. It works like update. You put it in your script, and you get calls. Now here, I have two controls. I have a GUI label, and you see the basic pattern. I tell it where it should be on screen, and then which text to display. And then I make a button, tell it where it should be on screen, and what it should contain. And here you've got the final result. Incredible, isn't it? Okay, onGUI is called every frame. It's just like update. So so this means you can have other code in there. It can be called many times per frame, which has some weird side effects I'm going to touch up on later. So, good. You have a basic code flow. Because we're calling this continuously, this is actually how you sort of do event handling. Here we have a very simple onGUI. Have the same label as before, and then we have the GUI button. But you've seen I've wrapped it inside an if. And basically, GUI.button is a function that returns bool. And it returns true whenever the user has clicked it. So to hook up interaction, you can just put code in here. And you can also just call a function if you if you have a large block of code, you want to separate that into sort of a more callback-like structure. But this is basically how you do it. Good? So, we can also have data controls. And normally if you have a text field in GUI, you sort of assign my text field.text equals something. Here it's a parameter. And if the user can edit it, the function will return the edited value. So we have a small example here. I create a string called player name, and then in my onGUI, I have the GUI.text field, tell it where it should be on screen, and the string to display. Now, this function will return what came in, and it can possibly be modified. So I assign it back to the player name. And this gives me a fully functioning text field, where I can just sit and type like mad. So, because we have this code flow thing, doing conditional GUI is incredibly simple. Basically, I have a small thing here. I have a toggle button. Now, toggle buttons, they take the parameter that sort of determines if they're on or off, which is a bool up here, and then sort of a string to display afterwards. And we assign that back, so the user can change this bool. Now, down here, I just if the advanced settings, and I can create more GUI controls. So this small script gives me these two controls, and if the user enables or disables this button, this text field will appear and disappear. So there's no sort of need to track your various GUI controls so you can hide them and show them. It's just continuously running over this function. So now this, and probably just this that is continuously get evaluated, is the key to understanding how this GUI system works. So I'm going to touch up a bit more on that with some more code flow. Okay, onGUI gets called multiple times per frame. How many times it gets called depends on what the user does. Basically, each time a sort of user event occurs, we get a call to onGUI. Most of the time you don't really care about this, but just be aware that it can get called multiple times. So if the user moves the mouse, you get an onGUI call. If he clicks a button, or clicks a mouse button, you get an onGUI call. If he types something on the keyboard, you get one call for each thing he types. There's also something called layouting, which happens behind the scenes. And finally, it gets called to display your GUI. Good. And here's the main thing. Unless the user has done any action in the GUI, which changes stuff, Unity GUI expects the same code flow through the function. So this means don't put non-GUI related code in there, because that code will get evaluated many times. And yeah, I mean, you'll just see weird side effects. So the example I had before, where I took a toggle button assigned into a bool, is perfectly all right, because there the change happens because of a user action. I cannot do this and just have a random value here, because then Unity GUI will get confused and you will see errors popping up. So if you have a sorted list you want to display, sort it in an update function or late update function, and in the onGUI, just run through it. Naturally, you can use for loops as well in here if you want to have many things listed next to each other, like a directory listing. That's perfectly fine. But yes, don't put other code in your onGUI. Good. So this is a basic fixed positioning. Any questions, real quick? Okay, cool. So we move on. Actually, I hate having rects all over my code. Sometimes I live with it if I get a PSD from a graphic artist and they just want the GUI to look like this. In practice, it's a major pain. You do localization, so you're localizing into German, which has a lot longer words than the same English sentence, and they no longer fit your rects. So we've also included an automatic layouting system. And you can mix and match the two. I'm not going to go into detail on how you do that, but basically we have this thing as well. So GUI layout. It's a bit like old school HTML. Don't know what templates. That's a typo. Like old school HTML pages. To switch from fixed function GUI to GUI layout, you replace GUI dot with GUI layout dot and remove the rect parameter. So down here, GUI.button with a rect and hello just turn into GUI layout.button with just hello. And Unity GUI will figure out where it should go on screen. Now, by default, it will put controls underneath each other because that's quite often what you want. But you can use grouping. So here, we have the basics. We have a label and a button. You see it here. Now, you want to group things, and here the trick is to think of like you do in HTML when you're writing tables. Here we got begin horizontal, end horizontal. And wrapping those around, I get this I am a label, and you can click me. So they become next to each other. If I put something else down here, outside the end horizontal, it will continue downwards. It's quite simple, and it works really well. And you can nest as deep as you want. So yeah, I mean, you can do your complex dialogues. Good. Sizing. When you're, right now I've said just remove the rects. Sometimes you have an OK button, and just because OK is a tiny little string, doesn't mean you want a tiny little button. So you can add overrides to all GUI layout. These are sort of sizing hints you're giving it. Actually, it's not hints. You're telling Unity GUI to just do like this. No matter what you think, this is how it should be. So basically, you have at the end you can add options. It is a list of function calls, and it's in the GUI docs, with 2 zeros, or which ones you can call. So you can have stuff like GUI layout.height. This will, if I add this here, I'll get a 50 pixel tall button. GUI layout.minwidth, I can just add, so I have GUI layout.height, comma, GUI layout.minwidth, will tell that the button should never be less than 150 pixels. This is incredibly useful because it covers the German case, where you have a decent sized button, but if localization decides, oh, this string just grew, the button will actually grow to accommodate it. So it might look a bit weird, but the user can still read the text, which is infinitely preferable. Yeah, you can add as many as you want, and you can separate by comma. There's quite a few in there. Good. So those are the basics of GUI layout. Wow, I'm speaking faster there. That's good because we've got lunch coming. Okay, any questions? Yeah?
How do you, for example, I have a text field, which I want the data to be removed when I click on the text field. How do you do something like on release or on press?
Basically what you do is, there you've got access to the current event being processed. So you can do ifs based on that. So if we're getting a mouse down and the mouse down is inside the button, then we change the string.
Okay, so if I manually capture the coordinates of the mouse.
Yeah. And if you sign up for a Unity GUI hands-on today, I can show you how it's done.
Is there a limitation on the number of languages it'll handle with the Unicode?
Basically, it will handle. Basically, you can use. Basically, that depends on the font you assign. So, by default we're shipping like an extended Latin. So we handle most Latin languages. Otherwise, you can assign a true type font and put in hieroglyphs if you want that. And the text field will adjust to this. So the text will not accept any input that is not part of, it can't display anyways and stuff like that. On to the last part, skinning. 3 skins that we're shipping as an example project. They were made by the Simeon guys. And basically they sort of, show off almost the same code. Running in GUI layout and, positioned in a form. And the interesting thing to see here is that GUI layout also affects positioning. In a way, a skin is a bit like a CSS style sheet. So so basically just tell it, buttons should look like this, or they should look like this, or they should look like this. And because this GUI layout is being used here, controls will push each other around, so everything can fit in there. And it will also resize the window to make sure that there's adequate room for the controls. Good. So the key to the key to understanding GUI layout is that each control is basically, when it's rendered, it's made up of 2 things. It's style and it's content. So style is of the background image with border settings, padding to sort of determine the sizing information, margins. A lot of these are like you know from CSS. Then you have content. Right now it's a text string. It can also be a texture. It can be both. It can also contain a tooltip. This is what goes in this button. So basically content is what you're rendering. Style determines how it gets rendered. If you pass in both a string and a text, the style will determine if passing in both an image and text, the style will determine if the image goes above the text or to the left of the text, or if it only renders the image, or whatever. These 2 gets combined when rendering, so you get this, I'm a button. Now, a GUI skin is basically a collection of styles. You create, one for each of the built-in controls, and you can define an arbitrary number yourself. So, because, you're doing games, doesn't mean you only have one kind of button in there. Most likely you have 5 or 10. Because when you're inside the game, you might want a bit more subdued GUI style than when you're out in the menus. So you can have multiple buttons in there, and then you can sort of choose in the GUI code how to do that. So when you create a GUI skin, A GUI skin is an asset, a bit like a texture. So you just, in Unity, go to Assets, Create GUI Skin, and you get a GUI skin in your project folder. Then, to actually use this GUI skin in your code, you create a variable for it, myskin equals GUI skin, and then at the top of your onGUI, you assign the skin you have assigned to the global GUI.skin. This means that all controls from here on down will be drawn in this style. If you have multiple styles, that's not a problem. You just do GUI.skin, have some controls, GUI.skin equals my other skin. And that will all work out correctly, also with all the layouting and sizing and padding. So you can mix and match completely freely. Good. Custom styles. All controls have an optional style parameter at the end. So you can make a GUI layout button, and this is the content. It is a text string. You could also pass in a texture here, then you would get an icon button. And then the style to use. The button defaults to the button style, big surprise, and the toggle defaults to the toggle style. You can pass in other styles as well. So you can just make your own styles, and then that style will then sort of say, this should be a pink button, or this should be my cool style. So it will use my cool style, it will find it in the current skin, and then it will use that to determine rendering, positioning, and layout properties. And a good example of that is to just make a toggle look like a normal button. So by default, you have sort of a checkbox thing for a toggle, but sometimes you just want it to be like a button because, yeah, that looks better in your GUI. So we have the classical GUI layout.toggle, hi there, myvar, and then we pass in a button as a style. So that means this toggle will not be rendered as if it was a button. It will still behave as a toggle, but it'll look like a button. And yeah, and then if the user toggles the value, this one will return something else, so we need to assign it back. So this is sort of a completely customized toggle button. Okay, questions? Yeah?
How are the images that are used in your styles handled when the games run at different resolutions?
By default, they don't. GUI layout will try to match, to sort of squeeze it into the screen if it can. Quite often it can do that because hopefully you're not filling up the screen with text. And it will word wrap strings, etc., etc. So you just use the same images. What you can do, and what we're doing in the Avert Fate, is that we have a couple of different skins. So depending on the user resolution, we just pick the one that's closest. That's one option. Another option is you can tell the GUI system to sort of move all the GUI around. So say, okay, so you basically, that's what we did in Global Conflicts Palestine, where we just said, okay, the minimum required resolution is 1024 by 768. So when we're drawing the GUI, we render a background image covering the entire screen, and then we center all the other GUI on screen. The third option is that you can assign an arbitrary matrix to your GUI. And it's a bit hard to actually get to work, but if you're just doing a simple scale, that's one line of code. And with that, you can have GUI sort of zooming in and out, being scaled. You can have it rotating. So you have a lot of options there. So those are sort of the three ways that you're dealing with this. Any other questions? Yeah?
Maybe about to get to this, but is it possible to change one style parameter without creating an entire new style? Like if I just went for one button, one more padding or less padding?
Basically, you can do that runtime, sort of changing it, doing your GUI control, changing it back.
Right, so I just, instead of creating an entire new button style, I just want to have a button, like a close button that tends to be up in the right-hand corner that has padding.
I mean, typically the close button being up in the right-hand corner, you would do with absolute positioning, because you just want it top right corner, and don't lay out this form because it's a close button. It doesn't have something which grows to something long in an arcane language. But what you can do, say you have a button and you just want a bit more padding on that one, for whatever reason. So what you can do is you can sort of do myskin.button.padding.left equals 20. GUI.button, blah, 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 and then sort of reset the padding after you're done. So it's a very malleable system. You can change any value. It will just have effect where it's being executed, and you can change it back afterwards. Yeah?
Can you animate the buttons?
Basically what you do is you would assign a different texture to them, or change the values. So if you have say you have a 10 image cycle, then you would change the texture in your GUI skin each frame in an update, and then just in your on-GUI just draw it, and then you would get animated buttons. Yeah? Anyone else? Well, in that case, I hereby claim to have the fastest talk of this conference. Yeah?
Can you code to move the buttons around?
Basically, since you pass in a rect, you can just use any variable there.
So if you want a button to move, turn away from user's mouse.
Well, I mean, yeah, then you just have an update where you sort of make the button free the mouse, and you've got it. I mean, that's the main thing here. Stop thinking about this as being objects you manipulate. The code gets evaluated immediately, and you can put anything in there. And then sort of, yeah, once you've done that, then you're home free. Okay, yeah.
What are your plans for the GUI stuff in the future? Anything you can share?
The plans?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's like a, I mean, there
We just
could be
finished
like.
it last night, man.
Oh yeah. It's like a sort of a graphical editor thing on your radar at all?
Yeah, it is on our radar. We're not ready to commit to anything, but yeah, we'd love to have it. Because yeah, I mean, I don't like passing in recs, but sometimes I also want my button to be in the right place. So being a true developer, I'm likely to do a complete framework that will save me typing in one rec. That's the same. I mean, why make a game when you can make an engine? There's somebody over there. Ashish?
I don't know if this question is good, but can you parent it to any object?
Like sort of move it around on screen?
Like, can you make it part of an object?
Sort of put it onto the 3D object.
Yeah.
Not at the moment. We're working on that.
Like if you're moving a 3D object, can the button be,
I mean, basically what you would do there, since you have a rectangle you pass in, you can just take the object's position and then sort of do, so basically sort of the top left corner of your button would be myObject.transform.position, and then you convert that from world to screen space, and then you pass that in.
And will it give it a perspective view?
Perspective views, not yet, but it's coming.
What about using different fonts?
Different fonts, we import TrueType fonts, so you can just assign any font you want. These, the ones I showed were optimized for having small download size, so they just use the built-in font. But yeah, you can do an arbitrary number. And you can hand draw your fonts if you want that, so you can get your rainbow-colored letters. Yeah?
In the preset styles that you had demoed here, how do you handle transparencies, things that you can see through the back end of the game while you're playing?
Basically there's, I'll just see if I can get back to that slide. I don't think these are particularly transparent. The built-in GUI skin is quite transparent because I wanted it to be usable over many different kinds of content. And basically just use transparent, semi-transparent images. That's one thing you can do. As part of the style for a button, there's also the text color. And you can just have that be semi-transparent. Also, there's some global properties, GUI.color, which you can use to tint your entire GUI. If you just assign a semi-transparent white, you will get semi-transparent GUI. You can animate the value to fade things in and out. Yeah, I think that's it. I saw some questions over there. You again, Genesis? Yeah?
Can you add illumination of any kind?
Not at the moment. It's just displaying images. Yeah.
So, how about drag and drop? Is that on the radar?
At the moment, you have to implement it yourself. And it's completely not on my radar. I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it right now.
Well, I guess it's relatively easy, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it is relatively easy, especially because you have I mean, you have this completely flexible system, so you can just assign, you just have a global object of the current thing I'm dragging, and then sort of handle that in your GUI code. Anyone else? Okay, David, Kearley? Okay, then a small announcement. Unity 2 is now live.